Open up a tab, grab a seat, and pour a pint. It's time for the Beer Guys Radio Show.
You want free beer? Go to the brewery.
Dedicated to the art, science, and enjoyment of craft beer.
Yo, what's wrong with the beer we got?
Now, here are your hosts, Tim Dennis and Aaron Williams.
Thanks for tuning in to this Beer Guys Radio Podcast Extra. We're at Max Lagers today in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're here for a pretty special day. We're talking with Friends Brewing and Max Lagers about the revival of Helenboch, one of Georgia's very first craft beers. Joining me today is Rick Roberts, Frank Cronin, and Dow Scoggins from Friends Brewing Company. Rick and Dow also run the U.S. Open Beer Championship. We also have John Roberts from Max Lagers and Dan Wilkins from the Helenboch Race Series. Guys, thanks so much for joining me today. Tell us about kind of the history of this beer a little bit.
Well, the history of the beer goes with the history of craft brewing in Georgia. We were the first craft brewery in Georgia. We had started a small brewery in Helen, Georgia, thus the name Helenboch. And so we started in 1989 was the first time we had the beer out. It won a silver at the Great American Beer Festival that year. We had a small brewery up in Helen, Georgia. And basically, my partners Rick and Frank and I used to always spend Oktoberfest up in Helen, and we used to, only have the finest of Lowenbrau up there.
Oh,
and
the good stuff.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
And had very memorable occurrences in the 70s. And so when we went up to Helen and said, hey, we'd like to make a beer for the town. And we were initially looking about putting the brewery in Atlanta. And the Chamber of Commerce and some of the local, the builders up there said, why don't you put the brewery here? And I said, well, you don't have a place. And they said, well, we can possibly build you one. And so that's why Helenboch got in Helen, Georgia, and how the name Helenboch
That'll
beer
do a
got
lot
started.
of encouraging you to build there, right?
No. We had lots of good times there before. And
yes.
Except we don't quite remember them all.
That's okay. That happens sometimes. So now the beer, I know it's related to the Helenboch race. Which chicken or egg here? Which came first?
For this reincarnation of
for the
Helenboch?
original, was there a race in, or is the race what brought the beer back?
The race is what brought the beer back.
Okay,
This is the first year for the race.
Okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, and you organized the race, correct?
I sure did, and I'm a native of Helen, Georgia. And when I was in 9th grade, I tasted this lovely beer for the first time.
Okay.
And
you were 21 in ninth grade.
In ninth grade, I
You
was.
were held back a lot, weren't you?
North Georgia is not as advanced in education as the other parts of the state, but
You did great. That's right.
yeah. But I could have. We started this race. This is our first year. I'm a native of Helen. I remembered the Helenboch story, and I thought, we're going to have beer at the end of a race, but I could go buy any beer for the end of the race. But I just, took a chance. I pinged Dow on Twitter. God bless social media, and he responded. And so I think it's a match made in heaven. We don't want just to have another race. What I love about the trail running community is that it's truly a community. Here, case in point, the two race directors, one who's here today, hiked the Appalachian Trail, and when you hike the Appalachian Trail from point to point, it's truly a community. You get really close. You make friends along the way. The other race director, who's not here, he and I met on a 100-mile trail race in Utah on mile 20, and for the next 80 miles, we became pretty close after that. And so, Friends Brewing, is a perfect name, I think, in history for the friends and community the type of race series that we're trying to build. And so I think this is going to be the perfect beer for runners after running a marathon, half marathon, and a 5K to quench their thirst. And so it's a pretty cool little happening.
So when you got the message after this beer being gone so long, did you just say this guy's crazy, or did that spark your interest to bring it back?
The true story about that is I actually knew his father.
Okay.
Back in the Helen days, and he sent me the note, and I just sent him a nice little friendly notes. I'll get back to you in a couple days. And so I suddenly said, "Oh, this would be a great thing to put on Facebook." And I honestly, jokingly put out there. I said, is there anybody I can borrow a brewery from or give me $500,000 to start a new one? Well, I didn't get the $500,000.
Okay, all right.
But within 15 minutes, I got 4 breweries who contacted me about doing the beer. There was one in Ohio, that's where I live now. Mm-hmm. That was kind of ruled out. There's one in South Carolina, and I called them up. They actually had connections they knew about Helenboch from the 80s and 90s and said that'd be cool. There's one in California, and the same thing is, he was from Atlanta. He had drank in Helenboch, and he said, I just maybe get a chance. And then there was JR from here, and I said, well, that's the only person I'm going to concentrate on because because he's local. And another thing is that he brews lagers. That's one of his specialties. And so JR contacted me, and nothing against the festival, but I thought the greatest thing that JR told me was, hey, I just want the opportunity to brew Helenboch. And I just thought that was so cool. And so I worked with a brewmaster who actually runs a brewing college. He teaches brewing. And so John Downing and JR got together and got the recipe all down. And today's version of Helenboch here is really darn close to the beers that we had.
That was going to be the question I had, is how close is this? Now, I know it's many beers ago probably since you had the original, at least fresh. Right. So, but from the fond memories, does this bring back the memories you guys had?
Yeah, I think it does, and it reminds me of pulling our beer wagon.
I've seen the pictures of that.
We had a beer wagon of Heidi and wearing our lederhosen and the girls in the dirndls.
Do you remember the first beer we got back with the Coca-Cola container?
Yes.
Remember those canisters? They shipped it down. John, we got that shipped down and tried that. This is close.
Yeah, but one of the great things is it's very crisp and clean, and it's a fantastic beer.
This is a good beer at the end of a race.
Yeah, yes, I think they'll enjoy it.
You could have done an Imperial Stout, which would have been a lot of fun to give people at the end of a race. That's right, yes.
It's a good beer for watching the race, too.
Yeah. That's right, yes.
Yeah. See, that would be just going to hell and not Helenboch.
Which is where 90% of this table will be, right? Is watching the race.
Yeah.
So, JR, let's talk about the new iteration of it. So, I'm assuming also with you, it'd been a while since you drank it, but
it
had the recipe.
Probably been since the late '90s since I had it.
Okay.
I remembered the beer. I moved to Atlanta in '96, and of course it was around then. But I visited Atlanta, visiting family even before that, and every time I came, it was like, oh, we got to, there weren't many options. I lived in Boston at the time, and I was like, nah, I don't want that macro crap you're spewing at me. And so, well, we have this beer, and I'm like, wow, that's really good. And so I remembered it. It to this day, I was like, that's fantastic. When I saw Dow's post, I was like, oh, I've got to get in on that. That's too cool. And this iteration, it was kind of interesting when John sent me the recipe. I looked at it, and you got to remember, in the days of '89, the laws in Georgia wouldn't allow you to make a Bock beer per se to style. You would be well below the 6% or below the 6% law at the time. And but when I looked at the recipe, I was like, wow, that's pretty much identical to my Hellesbach recipe, save for the gravity. So, a couple percentage points on the alcohol content, and I said I can brew that beer easily. And went back and forth a little bit as far as changes in the recipe. There's only some slight changes in the recipe. I think they originally used tradition hops for finishing. I use Hallertau and Mittelfrau, which are fairly interchangeable hops. I used the same yeast strain, as far as I can tell, is used. I think the biggest difference between this beer, as far as recipe and process goes, from the original, was that we didn't filter or fine it at all. This is a completely unfiltered beer, unfined beer, and it's all cleared simply through the lagering process, which is the way lagers are supposed to be.
Right. Now, I'm drinking it, and I unfortunately did not have the original version, but I like this version a lot. Just like we were talking about having at the end of a race, or, or watching the race, exactly, sit and enjoy it. And it's also great, like here at the brew pub, to have with a meal. It's a very clean, refreshing, so it pairs with a lot of different things. I just had your brewmaster's brisket sandwich down there, and sipped some Helenboch, and I can tell you that paired pretty well.
I bet it did.
So, How long can people get this? I know what you're doing the release today. So,
You know, we got a pretty good yield on this beer, and we're selling some of it to Dan, going up to the race that they'll be drinking. I would imagine probably the next 3 or 4 weeks it'll be on, maybe less. This time of year we sell a lot of beer. Of course, we sell a lot of beer.
About that time, right? Yes.
And especially a beer like this. This is one of the beers that'll fly out through the taps. But we do look forward to the future of supporting this race next year as well.
Oh, cool.
So this will probably be an annual kind of thing.
Awesome.
Build upon it.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Any other Friends beers coming back in the future? Is it all about Helenboch or?
Depends on what's the name of his next race. If he wants to make the Terminator Double Bock race,
there you go.
Well, he was talking about an October race.
Oktoberfest is best.
All right.
Guys, we had the peach beer. We could do the peach beer. We could make race here.
So it's decided right here. You bring back every beer Helenboch. Right? JR, you're going to be busy.
Well,
busier.
Maybe by next year we'll have another facility to make that happen.
Okay, all right.
But
there we go. Tease.
But with Helenboch and also the younger craft brewers, they didn't make 20 different styles back then. We basically, when we first started out, we had Helenboch beer and Helenboch Oktoberfest, and then we came out with Helenboch Holiday Ale, and then finally we came out with Terminator Double Bock. So there was only 4 Helenboch beers.
If you just launched this beer back then, it would have had to have had passion fruit coffee, dry hop, so
and barrel aged.
Double
barrel
aged. Guys, is there anything I didn't cover here that you'd like to mention? Let people know about the race or the beer or Helen or.
I just want to say we're creating a trail running endurance events, and so when I think of trail running and endurance, I think of trailblazers, and so these guys both at Helenboch, Friends Brewing Company, and Max Lagers are trailblazers. You have Friends Brewing was the 175th brewery in the United States of America in 1989. Today they're almost 5,000.
Right, there's states that have more than that now.
Put that in perspective. And so when you walked into a convenience store or grocery store, think of the variety you had to choose from in 1989 versus today. And so I love the partnership also with the oldest brew pub in Georgia with Max Lagers and how they've endured through the years. And when they came down to downtown Atlanta, in the 90s, it wasn't as accommodating as probably it was as it is today. So
that is true.
I love this. I love this trifecta partnership, and I just am honored to be a part of it. Yeah,
awesome. Guys, thank you so much for talking to us, for brewing this beer. We really appreciate it. It's very tasty, and we hope to see some more fun things in the future.
Great.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Beer Guys Radio Show. We're on demand via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Always online at beerguysradio.com. Aaron and Tim are back next week with more about the amazing world of craft beer. Cheers. The Beer Guys Radio Show on the Beer Guys Radio Network. beerguysradio.com.